second main individualist argument for why wealth inequalities exist is one that's been very insidious, which is a word which just means kind of evil and also very difficult to get rid of. And it's one that is actually, you'll see all over the place and was used as the main kind of justification of the Conservative government's massive cuts to social security in recent years. And that's this idea of dependency culture. Individualists would argue that by giving people support, by giving them what they would call handouts, by giving them benefits like job seekers allowance, you are encouraging people to rely on those, to depend on those, rather than to go out and get a job and kind of support themselves. So in this country, if you are unemployed, when I was unemployed before I was a teacher, I received a weekly payment called job seekers allowance. It's done slightly differently now, but it's a similar idea. But basically, it's an amount that's given to people who are actively looking for work. So they're trying to find a job, they don't have a job at the moment, and they need some money to cover their, like the expenses of living, like heating and food and all of these things. So every week I would go to the job centre, I would have an interview with somebody who talked to me about what I've been doing that week to try and find work. They might try and help me to find work, although they weren't particularly useful when that happened. And they would check that I am actually trying to find work. But individualists would argue that one of the problems with this is that apparently I would be like, well, I can just get money for free by doing nothing, therefore I'm just going to keep doing nothing and not try and find work. And so they argue that people aren't incentivized enough to actually get a well-paying job. They go, well, I'll just get a low-paid job and then that way I can get money from the government, or I won't even bother trying to find a job. And so it leads to wealth inequalities because they're not earning as much as people who don't live on benefits. There's also an argument that you hear a lot of, well, there are workless families or areas of the country where people are just, kids grow up never having worked, always living on benefits, and they just never, their entire lives, they never get a job, and then they teach their children that that's what they should do, and we basically teach people that you can just live off the society rather than actually getting work. As you can tell, even when I say that out loud, it doesn't really make a great deal of sense, and I'm sure you can imagine that that's not really the case. But this is a strong individualist argument, and it's very popular, mainly among wealthy people who've never actually had to claim these benefits. Interesting. So an example of this is the current benefit that's claimed by most unemployed people, which is called job seekers allowance. It's up to £74.35 per week. And some people argue that this is too much and it should be lowered to try and force people back into work. So if you lowered it to not enough to live on, then people might go, well, I can't afford to live on this, so I'm going to try and get a job, rather than just taking money from the government. Now, this idea is supported, as we said, by a lot of individualist thinkers. For example, Dr. Adam Perkins, who's a researcher at King's College London. He's claimed that the current benefit system encourages people to stop looking for work, and the evidence exists to suggest that personality and the desire to work can be negatively affected by the experience of being raised in a workless household. So basically, he's saying that this benefit system encourages people to give up on trying to find work, just live off benefits, and then they're teaching kids, you know what, there's no point in working, just live off benefits, it's fine, like, it doesn't matter. Well, it's opposed, this argument, by a lot of collectivists and most right-thinking people who say that actually living on benefits is really rubbish, and people don't want to do that. People don't want to just receive that support and not work. A study by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation couldn't find a single family in the UK where 3 generations have been unemployed, and found that the vast majority of long-term unemployed people are committed to the value of work and continue searching for work because people want to work. So this idea that job seekers allowance is putting people off working just isn't true. And perhaps it says more about people who think that, well, if I was being given this, I wouldn't bother trying to find a job. Maybe it tells us a little bit more about them than it does and what they think of work than it does about people who are actually in that situation. There is a big issue in this country that often people who are seeking work, people who are out of work, the unemployed, are often seen as scroungers, are often seen as people who don't care about work, and often job centre plus interviews can be very confrontational. They can treat people as kind of less than human. They can sort of accuse people of not trying hard enough if they haven't found a job, and ignore the reality that we just came out of one recession and now we're going straight back into another one. Jobs aren't there. So this idea of dependency culture is really dangerous because it can lead us to start thinking of people who are in real poverty and really struggling as not deserving our support. And the reality is that that's just not true.